Hi guys, how you doing? It's so nice to be with you here today. This will be my first address of the year 2025. I've been quite busy with a number of things, interesting activities that I will communicate with you guys later on. But I want to trust you are having a productive year, productive week. And I just want to make this quick video based on a debate that I've seen on the net, how to reach our food security, whether to go local production or to import our foods here. So we've had different debates in the different camps, right? And it was spurred by the recent remarks from the former Minister of Agriculture under the former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, Dr. Akiwumi Adesina, saying that we have to support our local farmers and we have to support local production. That's the way for us out of the food crisis that we find ourselves, right? So we've had people in different camps, talk based on our experimentation with the different approaches, right? From our founding days as a nation, where we are very much into agricultural production, before discovering oil, and we move into oil commodities sector. So in that way, our agricultural production declined and we subscribe to importation, right, which gradually eroded our local manufacturing potential and is one of the reasons why we are not producing as we should today. And also we've tested local production as in recent time in the immediate past administration, where we gave $1 trillion and more Naira credit facility to farmers in the program of anchor borrowers, right? So what we saw with this program was increased rice production within the last 4 years. But despite that, we saw increased rice production. We also saw food inflation regarding rice itself that was giving credit facility. The price grew over 500%, and even between last year and 2023, it grew higher. So people cannot really comprehend what is happening here, despite that we gave it focus. So this is what I want to touch on today. Although I've spoken about it in the past, I just thought to speak more on it, elaborate, so that it aids our comprehension, and as one of my job as an agricultural communicator, to help people understand what is happening in the sector, right? So when we talk about increase in the rice production that we've seen, is basically on paddy rice, right? Our paddy rice grew significantly, but we had a problem of conversion. When I say conversion, is the conversion of our paddy rice to meat rice. And what we see of global standards and of countries that are leading producers of rice in the world, like China, India, is that they have a conversion ratio of paddy rice to meat rice of about 70% and even higher. But what we've been able to achieve here, the highest that we've been able to achieve is about 65%, and we've gone lower as much as 40%. So there's a whole lot of productivity from harvest, to milling the rice, so which has to be something that needs to be worked on, right? So it's not even just that alone. There are also several factors, that contributed to this and still contributing to this, right? That, when placed embargo on 43 or is it 45 key items to be imported, wanting to encourage their local production, right? So rice is one of it. So we closed our borders. But the problem that we had was that we still had rice coming in illegally through our borders, right? And many times they come in cheaply than what it would take for farmers to produce their own and supply to the Nigerian market. So it sort of created a very tough competition for the local farmers, and many of them couldn't sustain. At the end of the day, they had to, abandon the production, and even some of them moved to importation of the very rice that we're trying to discourage, to come into the country. So another thing that we saw was that we tried to support the farmers, right? Giving them these credit facilities and all other input that they would need to produce their rice adequately. But the problem was that we have these credit facilities going to people that are not farmers, right? Maybe political farmers, or they took the credit facilities and invested in some other venture endeavors and activities not related to farming, because we are able to know this based on reports from the CBN, where it said that about 45% of the credit facility of the anchor borrower program wasn't repaid, and we saw another report by the IMF, right, saying that it's up to 75%. So independent research revealed that one of the reasons why we saw this failure and increase in non-repayable loans was because a huge chunk of the credit facilities went to people that weren't farmers, like I've said before, or went to activities that weren't farming related. So that on the one side, and another thing that added to farmers' predicament was the issue of input itself, accessing affordable input. So what we've seen is that rice itself is a fertilizer-intensive crop, right? So when you look at our fertilizer production landscape in Nigeria, we don't necessarily produce fertilizer. So what we do is that we source components from outside and blend here. We basically have a blending facility. So what happens is that we get a fertilizer component from places like Belarus, Russia, Ukraine. But since the beginning of hostility, conflict, and war in that region, the input supply chain for fertilizer components got disrupted, and it influenced significantly the price of fertilizer around the world, and price of fertilizer in Nigeria as well. So that's one of it. And another issue regarding the input cost is bulk of our input, also like the fertilizer, it comes from outside, from abroad, right? So basically we have this sort of continuous devaluation of the naira, right? Creating a huge gap between our local currency and currency that we use for importation, basically the dollar, right? And with high tariff from wanting to discourage importation, and we have this sort of very high cost of bringing in agricultural machineries that will make our production more effective, that will improve the productivity of our agricultural processes. So that's one of these, right? And another thing that we had is that we have issue of climate change, right? Climate change was really, really impactful in the last 3 years, especially for grains. I'm talking about maize, rice, and some other crops in that category, right? So basically, for plants, our crops to grow appropriately, they need these regular weather parameters, talking about the abiotic factors. We are talking about relative humidity. We are talking about rainfall, wind speed, insolation. They have to be in appropriate condition to support the physiological development responses and growth of plant. They have to reach photo period at the appropriate time, maturity at the appropriate time, fruiting, flowering, all those different developmental stages. But when we have a case whereby the climate isn't as regular as it used to be, owing to global warming and some influenced by anthropogenic activities, I'm talking about human activities, right? Then we have issue here. So one of the problems that farmers had is that they couldn't access input that were adaptive, or should I say resistant to climate variability, because we saw dry spell, we saw extreme weather condition, either dry spell or very torrential rainfall that doesn't provide for this appropriate weather condition that we said, right? So that's one of the problems that we had in that category. Another problem that we had was the issue of insecurity. So insecurity basically has been reported responsible for half of food insecurity. But we have a case whereby we cannot produce as we used to produce because our farmers cannot go to the farm. Security for life, for investment, for properties, for farmlands, ensure that production takes place consistently and as it should on a large scale, right? So what we have is that either the scale at which farmers produce is being halved, or we have farmers being sent packing from their lands, or they are being killed in numbers, and they are discouraged from continuing with production. Another thing that we had was the issue with irrigation. The irrigation is multifaceted in some way, in the sense that it has to do with climate change itself, right? Where we have this sort of dry spell and irregular rainfall pattern, and also from the aspect of not properly utilizing our water bodies, setting up appropriate irrigation facilities to channel water to the farm of the farmers. When you look at the socio-economic characteristics of our farmers, you tend to see that they are not really that resource abundant, have a lot of resource going into produce. So we saw that, and rather than them having appropriate irrigation, to support their production, flood that comes yearly from opening of Cameroon Dam, to destroy their harvest, their labor, and all that. So this happened in such a way that the farmers are not compensated and they get demoralized, discouraged, and to embark on production in the next farming season, right? This sort of creates a supply demand gap that further exacerbates food insecurities. And was it last year or last 2 years, right? Farmers, they lost to the yearly fraud about 700 billion naira, and who paid compensation for that, or who supported them for that, right? So is many of the issues that we continue to have, farmers facing pest and disease and all that. So basically, what I've been able to highlight here is that the problem that we see with not reaching local production is multidimensional, right? And it has to be addressed that way. We cannot say that we want to support farmers, right? It's good to support them. It's a very brilliant initiative, but without blocking the several loopholes or ensuring the other factors that would drive the success of the local production is in place, then it's going to be faulty from the start. So what we want to do now is that, like, for every of the challenges that I've mentioned, like for our farmers not getting the right support, for other people, taking their place, who want to invest in proper documentation, gathering of data about who our real farmers are, ensuring that, they are what they say they are, they do what they say they do, they are where they say they are, and they actually use the credit facility given to them for the intended purpose, right? So it's why I'm very bullish and support the initiative of the Ministry of Agriculture, in conjunction with the NIMC organization, to establish a digital identity for our farmers. So that's quite important. I support that. And also that we have to start locally manufacturing our inputs, machinery, seeds, agrochemicals, right? We have to establish them to create standard, so that they are productive, they are prolific, they are able to give us great results, per hectare